To succeed and thrive at C-suite level, you need strategic clarity and operational excellence. Hello and welcome to the C-Suite podcast. And if you're listening to this in early January, Happy New Year. I hope you're out on a brisk walk somewhere, blowing away the cobwebs and making your plans for the coming year. My guest on today's podcast is Bronwyn Boyle, and it's such an enjoyable listen. Bronwyn is one of these multidisciplinary people who flits effortlessly from one discipline to another. And you'll hear her in this podcast go from classics to coding to security and back again effortlessly. And I never run out of things to talk to Bronwyn about. Bronwyn is also an information security officer. She's CISO at a payments company. And in this conversation, we get to kind of go back and forth a little as to, what my role is as a COO or a CRO in asking her questions, in helping her uncover the strategy, in helping her match the information security framework to the unique setting of the organization. What it should do for you as a leader is make you think about how you want to communicate with your technology team, with your information security team, and how there isn't a one-size-fits-all information security strategy. It's a really enjoyable listen, and I hope you take lots away from it. I am delighted to be joined today by Bronwyn Boyle. Bronwyn has over 20 years' experience leading and advising international organizations in cybersecurity and technology. Her background spans technology development, cybersecurity, compliance, data protection, AI enablement, strategy and operations across a range of organizations, from international banks and Big Four consultancies to fintech startups, scale-ups and regulatory institutions. She is currently CISO at PPRO, a global e-commerce payments platform. Bronwyn is a committed champion for diversity and improved mental health in cybersecurity, and she has won numerous industry accolades, including Secure Computing's Women of Influence Award, and she is frequently cited in the top 50 women in fintech. And apart from that, she's just a really, really cool person to boot. Welcome, Bronwyn.
Thanks a million for having me, Jenny. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you.
I really wanted to have you on, Bronwyn. I mean, your CV and your decorations and titles are just mind-boggling. But what I love about you is you make it all so approachable and logical and sensible and accessible when I talk to you. So couldn't wait to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much. That's very nice of you to say. And that's very high praise coming from someone who does that so well themselves.
Thank you very much. But listen, before we get we are going to go into CISO, into cyber, into AI, into all the things that senior executives should be worried about. But let's start a little bit with you. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into what you do.
It's very interesting contemplating my journey because I was a real late adopter to tech. My degree that I was fortunate to study back in Dublin, where we both hail from, was actually in classical studies, right? So ancient Greek and Roman civilization and philosophy, the exact opposite of kind of future forward, kind of, bleeding edge technology and cyber. So it was a bit of a kind of a circuitous route I took. But I feel very lucky that I've had a very varied career. I started when I graduated in PwC doing software engineering. And I was so lucky at the time. There was a really, really robust training program that basically taught us the full software development lifecycle, from kind of very initial requirements gathering to tech spec and select to, writing up kind of designs and architectures, and then on the full scale coding, implementation, deployment, testing, and then maintenance and run, right? So what an amazing opportunity to kind of get that training and then also to start digging in and kind of putting that into practice across a broad range of different customers. And at the time, it was just the first wave of digital banking. It was kind of the dot-com years. There was a little bit of Y2K fun involved as well. But I got to work on kind of some of the first wave of online websites and e-commerce sites and digital banks. And that was really my pivot into security, right? Because I was fascinated by how it worked within software and technology. And it was an area I just wanted to dig deep on. So I was, again, fortunate to take a time out to study a master's in that. And then that was my pivot. And since then, I've had a very, very varied career. And as you rightly say, I've had very fortunate experiences across a broad range of organisations. But I think what has been interesting is to see, how you can come from very non-traditional tech roots and still find many of the skills that I applied in my undergrad days kind of relevant in this modern world, which has been, a bit of a blessing.
So what was your master's in?
My master's was in classical studies. So my first master's my thesis was on religious propaganda used by Mark Antony and Cleopatra in ancient Roman Egypt. So go figure. And then my MSc thesis was on the ethics and security of cybersecurity in voting protocols, in online voting. So go figure, right? There you go. You get from one to the other in a short few years.
What does that say about you? How do you reconcile those two sides of you, the classics Bronwyn and the cybersecurity Bronwyn?
Well, there's a common thread of nerd through it. So I think that is definitely something that is kind of... But it's really funny you say that, Jenny, because it's only probably in my later years, you kind of maybe the thread of the story makes a little bit more sense on reflection. And I suppose I've always been very, very interested in the cyber world, in kind of the people side and kind of the influence side and kind of the organizational psychology elements, the cyber awareness elements, how people are kind of interacting with the machine. And I think back at actually a lot of that was situated very firmly in some of the topics I was looking at in my early studies. Also, I was probably a little bit of an outlier in uni studying philosophy because I really loved formal logic. And what I didn't realise at the time was I was essentially kind of learning how to code. A lot of the structures that you would learn about in studying philosophy and studying kind of logic in philosophy are pretty much the same structures that you apply when you're starting to cut code. So again, it's not often talked about, and I think it's one of the reasons why we really need to be more proactive, telling the story of the different skill sets that you need in cyber and the opportunities there are for all sorts of diversities and backgrounds to join our community. It's good to draw out those maybe less traditional, more non-linear avenues as well to kind of give it a glow up, as I say.
That is genuinely fascinating. And I read a great article a while ago that talks about how true innovation results when you take a thought process or a framework from one discipline in life and you apply it to another one. That's often where you see a Nobel Prize. That's where you see, because it's a thought system applied to something new. And the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And I think you've just illustrated that.
I'll hold my powder dry, Jenny, in case the Nobel people come calling, but I don't think they're knocking just yet.
Just before we move off you specifically, you're in a very tech area. Give us an insight into that role as a woman. How have you found that? How have you found that in your career?
So it's been really interesting, I think when I started back in the day, there were very few women involved. And I was kind of very accustomed to being the only woman on a team and all of the kind of challenges that brought. And again, they were different times, Jenny, you and I were kind of peers and growing up in an industry that had, its own kind of challenges and kind of headwinds. And it's wonderful to see how much that has changed now and the opportunities and also just a bit more realisation again of the value of diversity in terms of kind of teams gearing businesses up for success, which is fantastic. I have had kind of my fair share of challenges. I have to say one of the things I've been really lucky about is that I have had very strong female role models, which has been fantastic. So, people like Sharon Barber, who is a CISO and CIO at Lloyds Bank and has done amazing work in cybersecurity for the UK government and abroad. Having people like her, people like Amanda Creek, names that you will have met through our shared backgrounds. And again, that old expression, if you can't see it, you can't be it. It is a touch point for folks. I've had a lot of women and girls coming into security as well saying, look, they hadn't met a female CISO before they met me. And I'm like, we have to change that. But again, it's also where I think a lot of the great work that you're doing to raise visibility of C-suite roles and to raise the profile of kind of successful women like yourself in C-suite roles, again, is that kind of barometer change that the industry needs, which is really great. I think the other reflection point is I feel very, very lucky to have landed in a lovely home here at PPRO where, diversity is very much at the core of the organisation. And that is, walking the walk as well as talking the talk. Our CEO, Matty Bring, is just fantastic. He's been awarded numerous accolades over the last few weeks and months to celebrate the diversity and inclusion that he's driving here. And a shout out to my boss as well, Bernie Miles, who's our Chief Technology Officer, and again has a very, very strong index on kind of supporting allyship and giving space for women to thrive. So lucky me, I found my tribe, which is lovely. And I'm lucky to have amazing women in my team as well. So, that's a win-win-win. So all good.
Yeah. And I think that role of just demystifying the role, explaining what it is. And I think further to your point, saying that you didn't come at it via a computer science degree or anything like that. There's lots of non-traditional routes into the role as well, which is really heartening.
Exactly, Jenny. And I have a fabulous niece who was having a school graduation, and it was really interesting because they talk about the sixth formers who are moving on and what they're going to do next. And I was really surprised because in a class of about 120, there was only 2 who were going into technology. Now, that was a surprise, but I was also kind of going, actually, it's great in a way as well, because we will continue to have, pools of women and girls from less traditional backgrounds. But I was also going, hang on a minute, we also need to, what is blocking some of those school leavers and women kind of choosing to kind of go into tech as an area of study straight out of school. So I think we have a bit of work to do on the pipeline.
I agree. I see that too. And I'm kind of mystified by it because as someone, I was not the soft skills or the softer subjects person. I was Miss Maths, Miss Physics, Miss Chemistry, Miss Accounting. I was numbers all the way. And I bridle against that assumption. Oh, girls like English and that sort of thing. I mean, well, I think it's a cliche. It was in my case, but I do wonder sometimes why we don't have more of a pipeline. I agree. We have to work on it. Okay, let's get into. So I want to talk about the CISO role because I'm hearing a lot, reading a lot, seeing a lot of discussion about this role right now. And it's not all happy reading for someone who, for the CISO community. So I'm hearing things like the role has had its day. I'm hearing, now it's all about the chief data officer. Now it's about the chief AI officer. CISO is no longer the term de rigueur. Let's cut through some of that. What are you seeing and what are your observations on that discourse at the moment?
So look, I think it's really interesting, right? Because the CISO role is one of the newer C-suite entries, right? It's still kind of a little bit in its adolescence compared to the more established, kind of long tenured C verticals. And I think that comes then with a little bit of volatility, and particularly when, you're safeguarding an organization's systems and data in a very rapidly evolving technology landscape. So your point there is spot on in terms of, AI is the best new thing now, and how is that going to be leveraged and managed? I have no doubt there's space and need for C-suite leadership to kind of drive those pillars. Interestingly, actually, in my role here and also in my last role before I came to PPRO, I was doing AI enablement as part of my role, and I'm doing that now as well. So we're trying to embrace kind of exploration and adoption of AI in a way that's grounded from security principles from the get-go, right? So that we're doing this safely and we're doing it in line with our data management practices, our governance and oversight. So I think there's some definite synergies there that I think are kind of ripe for exploitation and for convergence. I do think also that we don't really have a standard view of what a CISO does, right? So I think it depends very much on the contextual requirements of the organization. It depends on your regulatory environment. It depends on the type of business that you are. And I think the corollary of that is that we see such a spread of CISO requirements, right? So if you go and talk to any recruiter and you talk to a lot of my esteemed peers in the CISO community, one of the challenges that we have is that you see such a range from here's £80,000 a year for a one-person CISO who's doing everything from, configuring firewalls to setting a CISO strategy. Arguably, do you really need a CISO in that type of space? And is that, it's one dimension of a CISO role. And then you've got, the alternative side where you've got, Fortune 500 companies with huge teams and kind of multinational global requirements to kind of align on. So look, I think all of those factors buffet the definition of a CISO role. Do I think has it had its day? No, not at all. I think, the cyber threat landscape is ever evolving. It's becoming more and more adversarial again as bad actors are weaponizing AI in a way that we have to really kind of lean in to defend against. And I think the idea that actually now boards are very aware that the manifestation of a cyber risk can cause an existential threat to the organization's, ongoing life support So I think having that seat at the table, having that board recognition is really important. And that is underpinned also by the legislative changes I think that we're seeing coming through also. So we're gearing up for our 17th of January, the DORA first date of compliance in 2025. I think that has really, again, shone a light for anyone working in financial services about the essential need for the entire ecosystem to have a minimum baseline of control across both security and resilience domains. And I think if you ask about the future of the CISO role, I think maybe that's where I might see us moving forward, that it's more of an angle on the resilience landscape. We're covering both that security piece and resilience. So, our trifecta of confidentiality, integrity and availability are very much kind of, in the paradigm and the heart of it, maybe a chief security and resilience officer.
Yeah, that's a brilliant and all-embracing answer. And, we seem to be, I talk a lot with people about the geopolitical environment right now, as you've already said. There's physical threats. If you look at sort of a company like DHL getting a suspect package from a foreign country, and obviously the cyber manifestation of that and the attacks, not to mention the enablement, the AI enabling even more vicious and wholesale and intelligent attacks. Is the title less important than Bronwyn? Whether it's called a CISO, Chief Data Officer, Chief AI Officer, Chief Tech, it's a multidisciplinary role, right?
I think so. And I think, again, at the core of it really is kind of two components. One is managing risk, and in doing that in a way that's proportionate to your business and the kind of the technology choices and the strategic business aims that your organisation is trying to achieve. The other is building trust, and that's both internally and also with your customers and also across the ecosystem. And I think that is more important now than ever, really, because we are so intertwined in our digital landscapes that, the upstream and downstream effects can be really kind of far-reaching and broad. The CrowdStrike incident this year was a really stark example, right, of how something going wrong in one person's, deployment promotion can have really, really devastating knock-on effects. So I think, for me, it's less about the title. And I also feel, again, just, that idea of kind of recognition from all aspects of the organisation that security, when it's done right, can really be a business enabler. It can be a growth accelerator, and it can be kind of, a positive, rather than maybe the old reputation of lore where it was kind of computer says no, or like a gatekeeper, more of a blocker. So I welcome kind of that more strategic repositioning of the role.
And I think that leads me on to, maybe you've already started to answer the question, but I wanted to ask you, what is it that you wish that other senior execs understood better about the CISO role? So they might come with a predisposition towards, you're the firewalls person, or you're the cyber person, or so maybe talk a little bit more about that enabler and growth enabler piece of it.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, it's a great question. And I think I also kind of flip it, which is, from my perspective, it's always, what can I learn more about the other C-suites roles and what their priorities are and what their agendas are, so that we can then collaboratively and constructively set where our appetite is and set where we need to kind of make our kind of choices to invest or conversely kind of make kind of transparent and well thought out and considered trade-offs. But yeah, I mean, I think we have been on a journey, really. I mean, I think, again, if you look at kind of how the CISO role has evolved kind of since its inception, I mean, it's only kind of 25, 30 years old. And again, it's really moved from that technology background into something that has been acknowledged as a kind of a pervasive factor across the organisation. I still do think we have a little bit of a hangover from the tech days. And I think, again, depending on the type of leadership team that you're talking to or the types of boards that you're talking to, that can kind of come into play. It's also something, I mean, we as CISOs have to really lean in and change the dial here as well, by changing our language and by changing how we're articulating our messaging in a way that is business aligned. I find myself lapsing into tech jargon every now and then, Jenny, and I kind of give myself a wallop on the wrist for it, because, we can get very bogged down in all the techie talk, and it's bamboozling, and there's no, how can we expect our leadership teams to kind of understand where our concerns are if we're not building that bridge for them? So I think a bit of two-way empathy, I think, is super important. And I think also just that kind of general alignment on kind of the collective strategic objectives for the organisation, and then seeing how we all play our part in those.
I was about to say, and you beat me to it, the two-way piece, because I think if I'm standing here as a COO or a CRO and you're there as a CISO, I think it's just as incumbent on me, by the way, to say to someone, like you bring something up in a meeting that sounds a little bit techie or not fully understood. It's just as much on me to say, Bronwyn, can you explain that to me a little bit more in practice? So imagine this happens. Like, what's the risk? What could the implication be? Just play that back to me a little bit, and to kind of be an ally to you, so that we can have a conversation. And I have never not found a way, even with a really hardcore techie person, not to find an area of mutual understanding.
Oh, exactly. And again, I think it's, you're very good at that, Jenny, which is kind of something I kind of I admire. And it's something I kind of try and articulate again. My techie days are long behind me. And I think that's also, I kind of consider myself sometimes as a lowest common denominator user on some of this stuff, right? So I really kind of go into first principles, like what's the purpose of this? What's the risk area? What could go wrong? What's the impact? How do we describe this in a way that can be understood by folks who don't live and breathe this stuff? And also in a way that is highly contextual to the kind of the operating environment, and also, again, the business goals that you're trying to achieve.
This podcast is brought to you by the best-selling How to Be A range of books. These books, authored by me, Jennifer Geary, in collaboration with other seasoned experts, break down roles such as the COO, Chief Risk Officer, Chief People Officer, and Chief Sustainability Officer into their component parts. They explain the technical capabilities you need, but also how to operate at this level, preparing yourself, getting to know your peers, engaging with culture, strategy, building your team, and much more. Over 30,000 books have been sold, and the books have received overwhelmingly positive reviews. There's even a book about the role of AI called The Augmented COO. Check out the books, available on Amazon and Waterstones now. And as you were talking, there were two things that came to mind. I was hosting at the Risk AI conference just during the week, and two things you said triggered something in my mind. One was, this concept of the EU and AI Act, and there's 4 different levels of model, from sort of, the really serious to the not so serious. And people were starting to talk about the idea of some kind of a kite mark or some kind of a standard for AI models. What is it? What's it being used for? What data has it been trained on? What are the harms that could happen from misapplication of the model? The idea of a kite mark or a standard is not new. It's just being applied to a new area. And that's an example of where we can have a common terminology and a way of talking about something.
I love that. And I think, again, that common taxonomy really is kind of such a kind of an important piece to kind of get that consensus and compare apples with apples. And actually, your point there is just reflecting Jen Easterly at CISO in the US, the Cybersecurity institution. She was doing a speech there back in September, I think, and she talked about needing to change the language around security vulnerability management. And she said, can we stop calling them vulnerabilities and start calling them product bugs? Because she said that's what they are. They're actually bugs in software quality. And in a way, the abstraction of them into the security domain has nearly kind of shifted maybe the acceptability or the acceptance of them. And I thought that was a really interesting concept, because again, there isn't necessarily enough pressure on tech providers to address this stuff at source and to care about this stuff at source. And again, we seem to be kind of consistently having to wait for regulations to tell us it's not a good idea. So I would love also to see philosophically, again, it's one of the things, again, we're talking about internally here as well, is like, how do we just make sure that security is seen as product excellence? It's a part and core component of delivering high quality, software and technology that kind of delights our customers, and that does the job in a way that's kind of sufficiently robust.
I love that. And it brings more urgency, I think, to it as well. If you talk in very arcane, anodyne terms, we'll put that vulnerability on the list and come back in next month. As opposed to, this is what could happen. There is a chink in the armor. There is a broken piece of the chain. So yeah, I agree with that. The second observation, by the way, from during the week was that some of the long-standing things that we've always been doing in risk still count in this era of AI and tech. So, for example, we can all point to case studies of AI models being used and being misapplied. So, everything from, actually bad decisions being made to things like the sweary chatbot, right? And things like that. But actually your crisis management protocols, your escalation protocols, your invocation of comms, your, bringing people around a table to work an issue. They're disciplines that we've had for a long time as risk professionals. We just need to apply them to a new context now.
100%. And again, I think that's super important as well. I suppose depending on what type of organization you are, your AI development risks, your AI exploitation risks are going to be slightly kind of different. But I think there is a danger that we are maybe kind of looking at this too much as a kind of something shiny and new, rather than saying, actually, how do we kind of use all of that good risk framework foundations that we have in this new context? And again, that could be everything, as you rightly say, from that whole kind of chain there, but also, again, the third parties that you're using. Okay, if they're using AI in their product set, what's the materiality, right? I was talking to one organisation, and it was fascinating because they said, look, we were really kind of on the front foot with this, and we really kind of refreshed our whole supplier management piece. And then we were kind of like, actually, we didn't really need to do that. They ended up unwinding it because they'd added this extra layer of complexity when actually a lot of the questions were already there to be kind of to be factored in. They just needed a slightly different flavour.
Yeah, I love that. Common sense and keep it simple, and, our instincts in terms of asking sensible questions. So, with AI, what are you using it for? Why are you using it? How is it going to make what you currently do better? What have you trained it on? Is that a sensible sample? What are you seeing in the results? Have you got a human side by side in the beginning to make sure it's doing those are not hard concepts to embrace. Right. My books, and that I always say, whatever your C-suite role, start with looking, I'm going to say two things, start with looking at culture and start with looking at strategy. And we've talked about this a lot, but tell me, from your CISO angle, you're going into a new organization, you're looking at it for the first time, shiny new CISO. How do you line up those things of culture and strategy with the role of the CISO?
So, look, I think, again, it's I love chatting with you, Jenny, because I think we're super aligned on this, on the importance of culture and how vital it is as kind of a foundation for organisations. And it's the culture eats strategy for breakfast quote, right? So if we think about that firstly, I think for me, again, getting the right tone, getting a security first culture where people are thinking about this in their day to day, they feel kind of empowered to be responsible and accountable, for me is absolutely core. I think, again, historically, we might have suffered in the past from a little bit of victim blaming or blaming blaming employees, or, you got that wrong or whatever. And I think one of my massive bugbears, and I've said this before, but I will continue saying it as long as I hear it, that strapline that, people are your weakest link, that drives me bonkers. Because I think actually, people are your best line of defense, right? And I think, an empowered individual who is, encouraged to think about this as a kind of an extra string to their bow, and something that they want to think about day to day, and that they want to puzzle through, and they have that curiosity, they have that mindset, and then they have that, that radar to kind of tell you if something's gone wrong or how you can improve things. That is a phenomenal force multiplier. And it is something that I think, again, it often gets overlooked, but it is such an amazing kind of a, foundation stone for your whole organisation. The counterpart, again, on the strategy side, again, that is also absolutely vital, right? So, I think, and again, it's something that I feel I'm glad that now there's much more alignment between, security functions and kind of understanding the business strategy, understanding where you're needing to go. So you can actually try and understand then which are the risks that you need to be optimizing for, what level of kind of risk appetite are you comfortable to be able to kind of take and support. And also, again, you've got often conflicting priorities or elements that kind of one strategic objective may be undermining other elements of your risk tolerance. If you're not actually taking the time to spend with your business leaders and to understand what's worrying them, where they want to go, how you can enable them, you're really not setting security up for success in my book. So I think, I agree with you wholeheartedly. If you can kind of spend the time early on building relationships, building trust, and building that shared perspective, it paves the path for a very fruitful collaboration.
There's loads to unpack in what you said. But if we take, for example, a strategy example, as a CISO, if you're coming into an organization that, for example, says, we want to be an open marketplace, we want to be the platform, we want to be the enabler, we want producers to come and sit on our platform and we want to create an ecosystem, you're going to create a very different information security strategy to someone who says, we are proprietary, we are closed shop, our IP is our value. And I think we don't talk about that enough. I think we think there's secure and insecure, as opposed to... So I think the more, as a CEO, for example, if I'm sitting as a CEO, the more I can tell you about where my value is, about how we're going to unlock it, about how I want to create a competitive moat, that is going to actively change your security strategy, right?
100%. And again, I love, we need to be thinking more in these lines, right? Because I think, to your point again, yes, we have maybe evolved with certain patterns or archetypes of what constitutes security. And again, they're maybe not as relevant, or certainly depending on those organizational objective goals, they may be completely inappropriate, right? And again, the idea now that you can actually, the Amazon effect, right? That you can kind of publicly expose, APIs to kind of unlock value of stuff that was previously within your perimeter. That's amazing, right? You've all of a sudden got all of these new revenue opportunities and all these new commercial opportunities. But again, the security paradigms that maybe were applied when those were initially thought about or developed would not be appropriate at all, right? So I think that view of kind of digital transformation, commercialization, and kind of how security can transform and evolve with those is super important. And again, an area that we all, I think, as leaders need to kind of start driving more conversations on.
And then on the culture side, there was a lot of discussion during the week, and this AI piece about, there's some stat like 70% of organizations, people are already actively using AI with no knowledge or oversight by their board, right? So the fact is, the genie is out of the bottle. The tools are too good and too tempting not to use them. So I think there's two things to that. I mean, first of all, I think the onus is on organizations to create opportunities to use new technologies within the safety perimeter, so in the right way. And secondly, I would have thought you would far rather have a culture where someone goes, Bronwyn, I really want to try this new technology, but I've got a little red flag going off. Can I talk to you about how we might do this, versus just going and doing it?
Absolutely. And I think just a couple of points kind of come into mind from that. One is that I was at a CISO roundtable a couple of months ago. There was a great session actually being run by Databricks, who are doing great work on the whole AI governance. And I had a good chat with him afterwards. And he said, actually, you're quite unusual in driving the AI agenda from a CISO perspective. And he said, that was really great. He said, I'm hearing in most other organizations, the CISOs are the last to know. Nobody wants to tell them because they're afraid that they're going to say no, or that there's going to be kind of pushback or what have you. And I was like, that's really sad, but I can understand to a certain extent, depending on the organization or the relationships or the history or whatever, I can understand why that is a legitimate fear. So I think it is so important that we're more proactive, and that we, again, the second point to your earlier conversation about just being approachable on this stuff, right? Absolutely. If you can bring something to the table that's going to accelerate your business, that's going to kind of have a massive productivity gain, we would be so foolish not to explore that. And again, early engagement can help make sure that you're doing that in the right way, you're doing it safely, you're having proportionate risk discussions from the get-go, rather than having to kind of scramble to catch up when you find out about like shadow AI that's been kind of proliferating murkily under the surface, right? So I fully agree with that. And I think again, just it goes back to the transparency and trust conversation.
Are there any ways in either personal or professional capacity that you've been using AI that you found particularly helpful?
I'm really enjoying it. Now, I have to say, it goes back to my early days, Jen. I'm a bit of a late adopter on a lot of this stuff, right? So I feel like I'm a bit of a Luddite, but I am using it an awful lot. And I think we've got a really nice balance. Like, we're trialing some official, we're trialing the big brand AI, Gen AI capabilities internally at the moment, which is fantastic. And then we've also taken time to talk through the guidelines of what people can do generically. So look, do you know what? If it's not sensitive, if you're just asking a question, it's fine. Go and use ChatGPT. Absolutely, by all means. Just don't do X, Y, and Z. Do this safely. And then if you have a need for other more specific types of service, then we can explore those. And at the moment, it feels like it's a very good balance. I think one of the key learnings on this is, that meme that's going around, AI is not going to take your job, but people using AI will, right? So it's so important that we upskill. It's so important also that we demystify it. The trial that we're running now has been really insightful in terms of also kind of showing the importance of helping people, hand-holding them a little bit and saying, right, you sit in this function. Here's some proven use cases that can really accelerate. You're not having to figure this out yourself. We know this will work for you. So just trial it and experiment and see with that contextual knowledge. And likewise with some of the prompt engineering. I mean, I cannot tell you, I have been on a journey around prompt engineering and I'm not very good, but I'm definitely learning. And again, it's, when you crack it and then you start saying, oh, well, actually I've refined this, or, again, creating these kind of the customize your own kind of individual ChatGPTs, or, the Google Gemini gems, where you've, each iteration is giving it more knowledge, it's giving it more context, and it's honing what you get out. They are really exciting kind of gains to be had.
That sounds incredible. And I think a real light bulb for me was somebody saying this week, the real future and the real value isn't like plugging a question into ChatGPT, fun and helpful and all as that is, but it's actually learning how to take your organization's knowledge base, your IP, and in a safe, private LLM focused model, fusing that with all the best that the internet and AI has to offer, but to create something really bespoke and value adding. And that's when you get to sort of turbocharge your competitive advantage.
Beautifully expressed, and actually a little callback to your conversation at the start again, which is that kind of application of one discipline in another context. I mean, the fact we now have technology that can allow us to cross-pollinate some of those, and all within the kind of the overall context of your organisation, and the tone and the communication and the knowledge and the documentation, it's quite an exciting future.
From the sublime to the ridiculous, this week I have used AI to produce some really bad country and Western music. I'm halfway through an album and it's all based around housekeeping. So my debut single is Iron Out the Creases in My Heart. And so watch out for this in all good music sites shortly.
I cannot wait. Please sign me up to your fan club. The other one, the new one, the music one rather than the author one.
It's a new departure for me. What can I say?
If you need a harpist, Jenny, sign me up.
Well, I wasn't going to bring up the harpist, but now that you've said it, and this is what I love about your brain, Bronwyn, we've got philosophy, classics, mathematics, music, and security, and somewhere in there is just genius. Honestly, there's so much still to come. But anyway, I guess one question: what would you tell your younger self? What would Bronwyn tell younger Bronwyn? What advice would you give yourself?
I think I would just say it's okay not to have it all figured out. I grew up at a time, Jenny, I think you and I have chatted about this before. We've had great family upbringings and a great kind of childhood in Dublin. But that question you ask kids, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? That plagued me because I never knew. I mean, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up, right? And I nearly felt like it was a lack or it was a negative thing. And actually, it's only now in my later years and my kind of, middle age that I'm kind of going, actually, that in itself is actually a good thing, right? You're not putting yourself into a box. You're not just articulating on one core discipline. You can have all the mad stuff of the music and the maths and the philosophy and the coding and all the rest of it. And actually, now more than ever, I think we really need like flexible mindsets and kind of diverse mindsets and kind of people who are happy switching across multiple disciplines. So I would like to go back to my younger self and say, don't worry about that question. That Richard Scarry book, what do people do all day? You know what? By the time you're working, they're going to be doing all of everything all day. So don't even worry about it.
It's going to be different. And my other twin hate question is, where do you want to be in 5 years? I don't know. I don't know what 2025 is going to bring right now.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And it would be limiting. It would be limiting to say that. No, I think that's so true. Last thing I want to ask you, Bronwyn, is there, and this can be personal, professional, whatever, is there a book or a resource or something that you turn to time and again that you just find really, really useful?
I am a massive bookworm. I'm like just complete readathon nerd book person. So there are loads, there are too many. And this is going to be possibly a little bit cringe, but actually one of the books I always come back to is The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. And I probably didn't pronounce that correctly because my French is terrible these days. But it's just that little slim book about the little prince on the planet looking after his rose and his fox. And it has so many beautiful lessons and very interesting lessons around caring for the planet and having empathy and interestingly not being too hung up on numbers, Jenny. But it's for a very, very small book, it has such a powerful punch, and I nearly always have a little cry when I read it, but it keeps on giving. So yeah, probably not I'm also a big fan of Simon Sinek, but I'd probably take The Little Prince over him.
No, I love that. Getting back to simplicity and getting back to the core of something when life gets complicated. I think that's a terrific answer. Bronwyn, someday when your calendar gets less busy, how to be a CISO, it's still out there. I'm here whenever you are. It's always so interesting and enlightening to talk to you. And there's something in this for CISOs, but I think for everyone sitting around a leadership table to take from this. So thank you so much for coming. It's been great.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed the podcast. For more information about the How to Be a books, the C-Suite Framework courses, the podcast, or to get in touch with me, head over to www.csuiteframework.com.